Siriacorn Siraboon, an enthusiastic young soul known to her family and various schoolmates as Bung, was an adventurous and outgoing student of Boronia Heights College. Her passion for education and dedication to music and dance were cut short by an unexplainable, unsolved disappearance in June of 2011. Leaving all who knew her across the suburbs of Melbourne, Victoria, and the entirety of Australia, grasping for answers in a sea of evidence that drowned us all in doubt. As a hope to provide more substantial reasoning built upon observable evidence and situational analysis, this is an examination of Bung Siraboon's vanishing in the Boronia neighbourhood, and the ensuing trail of mysteries. This is Cold Case Detective. Bung Siraboon was born at the close of 1997, just past the Christmas holiday on December 30th, in Ubon Ratchathani, a north-eastern province in Thailand. She was the second daughter in the family, a new baby sister to her older sibling Siriporn, known better by her nickname of Pang. Sadly, the family of four did not last long together, as the relationship between Bung's mother and father soured, and their father left when the girls were very young. He slowly disappeared from his daughters' lives, and the sisters spent most of their time under the care of their mother, Vanida. For a few years, Bung and Pang grew accustomed to their life with their mother, until in 2004 she met an Australian traveller by the name of Fred Pattison. Fred had fallen in love with Thai culture and exploring its wondrous worlds back in the 90s, and made it a point to vacation between Australia and Thailand every year. This year in particular, he and Vanida connected unexpectedly, and their friendship blossomed into a beautiful, healthy relationship. Over the next 2 years, the couple dated despite their long distance, and in 2006, Fred finally moved to Thailand, intending to reside there permanently after he and Vanida married. Both Bung and her sister Pang welcomed his involvement in their family with open arms, allowing him to refer to them as his own daughters, whilst enjoying the presence of a loving father figure. Despite the loving bonds that the four shared, the financial side of the newfound marriage was not nearly as strong. Fred and Vanida had attempted to start a small business manufacturing awnings, however the market proved to be too barren for much success, and the promising venture quickly nosedived into failure. To try and help mitigate the family's losses, Fred moved back to Australia and worked as a fitter for a Cadbury factory in Victoria. Vanida, Pang and Bung joined him in 2008, and the couple worked hard to set up a brighter future for the girls. Vanida got a job herself so that the sisters could get a proper education, and she and Fred could return to Thailand one day. Thus, Pang and Bung were entered into the Boronia Heights School District, located in the fairly populated suburb of Boronia, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Bung started 4th grade at Boronia Heights Primary, and didn't take long to make friends with fellow classmates. One in particular was Jamai Hillard, who remained close with Bung throughout primary and into high school. Jamai later described Bung to reporters as an unbelievably kind and compassionate young lady. She said that Bung was effortlessly happy and rarely shed the smile from her face. It was why the girls got along so well with one another, and why Bung could make friends with anyone. She had no fear and would take on challenges and new activities without a second thought. Despite her reserved nature, she was incredibly polite, and, when comfortable around a new crowd, would flourish with energy and joy. Another friend, Layla Preston, would later state Bung actually enjoyed school and being around peers, seemingly feeding off the imagination of others while cultivating her own. While Bung excelled in mathematics and science subjects in school, her true passions were found in the arts, specifically in dancing and drama. Her favourite artist at the time was Justin Bieber, as well as numerous K-pop groups. In fact, in 2011, Bung had been rehearsing a dance number with Jamai that she crafted the choreography for herself, and the endeavour was dear to her heart. Jamai recognised this and knew Bung was excited to showcase their hard work when the time came. It is one of the reasons she can't fathom what exactly happened later that June, when Bung disappeared on a normal Thursday morning walk to school, suddenly silent from the streets of Boronia under a rising sun. Let's now turn to the timeline of events that led to the unsolved disappearance of Bung Siraboon. Ever since she started high school, Bung Siraboon would walk to school at Boronia Heights College, given permission by both her mother and her stepfather. The Siraboon household was located on Elsie Street, just a 10-minute walk from the school building. It was an easy trek, and Bung would often make it with her classmates and closest friends, including a girl named Taylor, and of course, Jamai. Jamai and Bung even had a little park where they would meet at their way to and from school, sometimes sharing snacks or catching up on the latest gossip before and after class. However, as the sun dawns in the early morning hours of June 2nd, 2011, Taylor tells her brother that she's going to walk with him to school that day, when he asks if she wants to head to Bung's house and walk with her instead. It wasn't a peculiar incident for Taylor to walk with her brother, as she and Bung didn't necessarily journey to school together every single day. Meanwhile, Bung Siraboon's alarm clock goes off at some point after 7 AM that same Thursday morning. Bung rises from bed, puts on her usual school uniform, and eats egg rice soup for breakfast. At just around 8 AM, Bung's stepfather Fred returns home from a graveyard shift at the Cadbury factory. He goes into a back room at the house while Bung finishes readying herself for class. 8:30 AM arrives, and Bung says goodbye to Fred and leaves her home like every other school day. A few moments later, and a neighbour spots Bung heading east down their road towards Albert Avenue. This unidentified neighbour would later tell authorities that Bung appeared to be in normal spirits and in no distress, that she was wearing her usual uniform and a blue raincoat. This will be the last confirmed sighting of Bung Siraboon. Another couple of minutes pass by, and Bung theoretically reaches the end of Elsie Street, where it connects to a busy main road called Albert Avenue. She crossed through traffic every other day and is thought to have done the same, making a southwest-bound right turn. After walking along Albert Avenue for 1 block, Bung then theoretically turns left onto Harcourt Road, another suburban street much quieter and low-key than Albert Avenue. At 8:55 AM, reportedly, another neighbourhood resident spots Bung walking along Harcourt Road, right at the intersection with the Monco Street cul-de-sac. This would have been a mere 130 metres from the gate at the end of Monco Street that connected to the Boronia Heights College grounds, the entry point where Bung and her friends would enter the school's property each morning. It is unknown if Bung ever reached that gate that morning, and the Harcourt Road sighting is never confirmed by police. Once school begins in the next hour, Boronia Heights College administrators, along with Bung's friends and teachers, simply assume she's absent for the day when she never arrives to class, despite her sparkling attendance record. Because of this oversight, both Venida and Fred are under the impression that Bung made it to school safely, and no alarms are sounded throughout the day. It's not until just after 3:40 PM that afternoon when Venida's mind wanders. She takes note of the time and mentions out loud how Bung is usually home by then, thinking through where her daughter might be. The clock then strikes 4 PM, and the telephone rings at the Siraboon household. Fred answers, thinking nothing of it, and is surprised to hear Jamai Hillard's voice on the other end. Jamai asks Fred if she can speak to Bung to bring her up to speed on what she missed, and what the school has in store for the following day. Fred asks Jamai why she wouldn't have just told Bung at school earlier, to which Jamai informs Fred that Bung never showed up. It is at this point both Jamai and Bung's parents realise Bung has gone missing, unbeknownst to anyone. Mere minutes pass by before Venida and Fred are in the car and driving to Boronia Heights College. They run into the admin offices where the principal confirms Bung's absence from school on Thursday. At 4:20 PM, the distressed couple walk into the City of Knox police station. The Knox police implore the pair to contact any and all relatives and close friends of the family in hopes that Bung may be with them. Without much luck on the family side of connections, Vanida and Fred visit Jarmai and recruit her help in contacting Bung's friends later that evening to see if they might know anything. Jarmai suggests that they check the park where the girls would meet during their walks to and from school, but no trace of Bung is picked up there either. Throughout the night of June 2nd into the early morning of June 3rd, Vanida and Fred go to each of Bung's friends' houses in person to check on any updates they may have. Nobody shares anything useful, and after the round robin of cold calls, the distressed couple return to Knox Police Station. As the day of June 3rd progresses, an official search goes underway. The Knox PD canvasses the area, knocking on the door of every neighborhood home, while distributing missing persons flyers across the town and its neighboring suburbs. The streets are rapidly filled with search and rescue volunteers. By the time the evening news rolls around, multiple broadcast stations have heard about the hunt for Bung Siraboon and blast her story on all the major networks. Reporters are diligent in asking the public for help, and it seems a real momentum is building. Over the next few days, the investigators pore over hours upon hours of CCTV footage from area cameras found at local businesses and public transportation stations. They also pay visits to all registered sex offenders in Victoria, feeling more and more that Bung's disappearance is at the hands of a kidnapper. The days turn to weeks, and authorities send officers into the Dandenong Ranges National Park and other mountainous woodlands to search for Bung. Despite multiple attempts, no clues are pulled from the nature reserves or hiking trails. Around the same time, in late June of 2011, two separate teenage girls come forward with testimonies relating to kidnapping attempts in the days after Bung went missing. However, neither story is believed to be related to Bung's case, after one was proven to be a hoax. In October of that year, 4 months after Bung's vanishing, police put together the Puma Task Force, a special rank of detectives to focus on the manhunt for Bung Siraboon. Puma is the first major focus group in a police investigation since 2003 in Melbourne, Australia. Over the next 2 years, the Puma Task Force receives over 900 calls, investigates 250 known sex offenders, searches over 1,000 homes, and collects over 1,100 pieces of evidence. However, they find nothing substantial, and the case continues to grow cold. In October of 2013, the task force is shut down, and all of its files and findings are handed back to homicide detectives of local police ranks. Years go by, and various leads are presented to investigators, yet a lot of the calls are proven to be hoaxes, including false confessions made by Melbourne locals. On the 5-year anniversary of Bung's disappearance, police turned to the public asking for help in clearing up a couple of alleged sightings of Bung back in June of 2011. However, nothing of merit comes through. In the years that follow up to the present day, both law enforcement and the friends and family of Bung remain confident that someone out there knows something about the whereabouts of the 13-year-old schoolgirl, and continue to plead for answers. There is currently a $1 million reward for anyone with any information that leads to the discovery of Bung, as sleuths and detectives alike work diligently to find that one major break in the case that will lead us to Bung's mysterious fate. Like many missing persons cases involving children, the Bung Siraboon investigation saw a horde of potential sightings enter the airwaves of police and Crime Stopper hotlines in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance. Many of these sightings were the result of paranoid citizens seeing abnormalities on a canvas of regularity, statements without much certainty, and usually without any truth to back them up. When tragedy strikes a community, it's easy to see things that aren't really there, and construe situations to fit a narrative, or in these cases, fit a possible outcome to a horrifying mystery. However, not all sightings of a missing person are false cries of wolves, and in June of 2016, detectives announced 2 separate testimonies that piqued their interests, and thus piqued ours as well. The fascination with these 2 sightings of Bung are centered on their strikingly similar details, both involving a man with various tattoos and a white car. They both came the morning she went missing, between 15 and 30 minutes after she left her home in the Boronia suburbs. The first sighting took place in Boronia, roughly 15 minutes after Bung's departure, probably at around 8:45 am. The witness reportedly saw a young Asian girl matching Bung's appearance looking out the back window of a white Ford Falcon, either an EA or an EF, manufactured sometime between 1988 and 1996. The white car was seen heading east at the intersection of Boronia Road and Florestan Road, driven by an older white male in his 50s or 60s, sporting slicked back brown hair in a rock and roll style, and tattoos all over his arms, including a noticeably colourful tattoo on the upper section of his left arm, near the shoulder. There are also some reports that state the driver was wearing a blue singlet. However, this has not been confirmed. The second sighting took place around 15 minutes after the first, between 8:45 am and 9 am on June 2nd, likely 30 minutes after Bung left home. The big difference with this testimony is it came near the town of Rowville on Napoleon Road, an area roughly 9 to 10 kilometers south of Boronia. The eyewitness told police they saw a girl matching Bung's description sitting in the passenger seat of a white station wagon as it progressed through the morning traffic. From memory, the witness described the white vehicle as a Holden HQ Kingswood, an older model originating from somewhere between 1971 and 1973. The driver of the station wagon was also a white male, but appearing to be more middle-aged, in his 30s or 40s. The witness couldn't tell if the man was balding or just had incredibly light-coloured hair, but did mention he showed tattoos covering his neck and arms like sleeves. What he was wearing couldn't be discerned either. While most investigators believe that these sightings are separate instances and likely disconnected, they could technically be of the same car, driver, and, horrifyingly enough, the same passenger, Bung. If the first sighting did occur at 8:45 am, it's possible that it could have made its way southbound on the Napoleon Road and headed towards Rowville by 9 am in order for the second sighting to take place. We have checked various mapping and GPS resources, and, at least in 2020 conditions, the drive from the intersection of Boronia and Florestan Roads to the southernmost point of Napoleon Road at 8:45 am on a weekday commute is between 11 and 15 minutes. We assume the traffic patterns haven't changed drastically enough since 2011 to suggest it wouldn't have been possible 9 years ago, on the morning of June 2nd, to make this trip, thus providing the possibility that the first and second sightings are of the same vehicle. It is also worth considering one of the witnesses misread the make and model of the car, or didn't get a good enough look at the driver to properly account for their age and hairstyle. That being said, a Kingswood station wagon and a 1988 Ford Falcon really don't look too much alike, and suggesting someone mistook a 60-year-old man with slicked back dark hair for a 35-year-old man with short blonde hair seems a little far-fetched. Thus, we don't firmly believe the sightings to be connected or reflecting of the same situation. However, we, like the police, do believe there are good odds that at least one of them could involve the real-life Bung Siribun. We therefore ask that if anyone recognises these descriptions of either the white cars and or the tattooed men, please reach out to the proper authorities. These sightings have not been ruled out as of today, and could be the major clue to taking the next step in finding Bung and bringing closure. Let's now take a look at the most prominent theories surrounding the unsolved disappearance of Bung Siribun. Like many missing children and teen cold cases, parents and guardians are always questioned in the early days of an investigation. As history suggests, many kids who disappear do so at the hands of their caretaker or family member. Thus, the first person both police and bystanders alike looked to for possible suspicion was Fred Patterson, Bung's stepfather and paternal role model. An anonymous source, most likely a fellow Boronia neighborhood resident, tipped off authorities that they had witnessed Fred digging around their Elsie Street home in the days and weeks that followed Bung's disappearance. When law enforcement approached Fred as a suspect, he happily complied, and he and Venida allowed detectives to search every nook and cranny of their home, including excavation around their property. Police found zero evidence to suggest either parent was responsible or held any troubling secrets, and authorities thanked them for their openness and cooperation. However, it didn't dampen the whispers spreading around town that Fred was up to no good, with many people questioning, without fair evidence, his motives in embedding himself in Thai culture and bringing back 3 women to Australia with him. They suspected that Fred had sinister motives in his relationship with his wife and 2 daughters, and sadly the prejudice and insecurities some feel regarding interracial marriage reared their ugly heads as a desperate attempt to give meaning to the unknown. These whispers eventually evolved into complicated theories that it wasn't the stepfather who should be investigated in Bung's disappearance, but rather her birth father, who still lived back in Thailand during her vanishing. Police agreed and traced those musings back to her home country, but with the help of international policing agencies, they soon discovered these leads led nowhere, and Bung's father was removed as a legitimate suspect as quickly as he was considered to be one. By the end of the first month after Bung went missing, it became clear to investigators that Bung did not leave of her own volition, but was rather kidnapped or abducted against her will. In fact, by the time the calendar flipped from June to July in 2011, detectives were certain they had a serial kidnapper lurking in the Melbourne suburbs and along the base of the mountain, snatching young, unsuspecting girls from their streets after 2 young women came forward with testimonies that they had experienced attempted kidnappings around the same time as Bung's disappearance. The first testimony hinting at a kidnapper came on Tuesday, June 21st, 2011, out of the neighbourhood Ringwood, a town only 10 minutes away from Boronia. A 16-year-old white female told police she had been walking along a Ringwood road when a blue sedan pulled up to her and the male driver rolled down his window before attempting to seduce her into the car with him. The girl obviously and understandably refused, and so the car drove ahead and pulled into the hard shoulder in front of her. The girl continued walking, and as she passed the blue sedan, the male driver exited the car and grabbed her arm from behind. In a stunning feat of courage, the 16-year-old girl fought off the would-be abductor, scratching and clawing at the offender until he let go. Once out of his grip, the girl sprinted into the nearby shrubbery and camouflaged herself from the man's view. A few moments later, he got back into his blue sedan and drove away, never to be seen again. When describing the man to authorities, the girl said he was in his late 50s or early 60s, sporting dark-coloured clothes, greying hair, and, most notably, decaying teeth. The best comparison she could make with his appearance in general was to that of a man from Southern European descent. From a broader perspective, the timing of the abduction attempt did not sit well with investigators, who were worried about a serial offender. However, other detectives pointed out the more detailed inconsistencies. While the 2 neighbourhoods are close in comparison with the rest of the country, Bung was Asian, while this girl was white. In addition, Bung's disappearance came in the early morning, where this girl was approached in the afternoon. Of course, these points didn't disprove any connection, but it was enough to raise the eyebrows of everyone involved. Then came the second testimony that seemed to confirm everyone's worst nightmare. Just over a week later, on June 29th, a second young girl alerted authorities of an attempted abduction. This girl was just 11 years old, but was of Asian descent and lived in Boronia as well, even knowing Bung personally from playing around the neighbourhood. The specific details of the kidnapping attempt were not clarified. However, law enforcement did say they were similar to the Ringwood case, and released a sketch of the alleged perpetrator as described by the 11-year-old girl. The man was older, in the same age range as the Ringwood offender, wore a matching red and dark grey sweatsuit, as well as white-rimmed glasses, and most creepily of all, a surgical mask. After the public caught a glimpse of the disguised attacker, paranoia skyrocketed around Melbourne at large. Children were no longer allowed outside by themselves, and the streets were patrolled by cops and citizens alike, all hoping to get their hands on this newly arrived serial kidnapper haunting the Boronia area. A tremendous amount of resources by the Knox Police Department was put forth into this specific investigation, with the details between Bung and the second girl's cases signalling to even the most expert officials that a serious situation had surfaced. That was until the first week of July 2011, when the 11-year-old girl revealed to her parents and then to police that she had fabricated her entire story regarding the attempted abduction. There was no man in the surgical mask, and everyone was left right back where they started. So, despite this false lead, is it possible there was a serial criminal active in the streets of Melbourne that summer of 2011? While it can't be ruled out, it's now thought to be highly unlikely. The only known cases of missing teenage girls, or at least attempts of such, to happen in that area and at that time were the cases of Bung Siraboon and the unidentified 16-year-old Caucasian girl a week later. Without the support of a third abduction, there were too many holes between the other two profiles to draw a concrete connection. Serial kidnappers almost always target victims of the same race and with the same modus operandi, such as a preferred time of day. It may not seem like a big deal that the Ringwood girl was just 3 years older, but the contrasts of physical appearance between a 13-year-old Asian girl and a 16-year-old Caucasian girl would be too great to draw meaningful conclusions. Had there been other attempts, more data points could be infused in the analysis to show investigators if there truly was a boogeyman-like character prowling the neighbourhoods. But as it stands, we must conclude that the Ringwood abduction attempt was probably not related to Bung's disappearance, and was at the hands of a different perpetrator. So of course we arrive at the grand question: who could that perpetrator be? Australia isn't necessarily known for its long history with serial killers or disastrous rates of violent crime, but it still has its fair share of criminals and potential repeat offenders. The most oft-theorized connection in regards to Bung is that of infamous child serial rapist Mr. Cruel, whose horrifying moniker needs very little explanation. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Mr. Cruel was an anonymous Australian man who broke into the houses of 3 young girls: an unidentified 11-year-old girl from Lower Plenty, 10-year-old Sharon Wills of Ringwood, and 13-year-old Nicola Linus of Canterbury, and gagged, binded and assaulted them, sometimes kidnapping them to an undisclosed location before releasing them in a nondescript public location hours later. All 3 cases happened under the cloak of darkness between 11:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m, all in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Mr. Cruel never left behind forensic evidence and conducted covert surveillance on each family before breaking into their homes. He was so intelligent he used red herrings to distract police and throw off detectives, while threatening to kill his victims if they acted up during his attacks. Mr. Cruel was known for his tailored black balaclava he wore during one of his crimes, as depicted in the widely circulated and spine-chilling police sketch, and has had over $1 million worth of rewards offered by police for any information that might lead to his identification or arrest. He was the Australian version of the Golden State Killer, and thought to have had over a dozen other victims before the 3 confirmed and connected rapes starting in 1987. Another suspected victim of Mr. Cruel came in the fall of 1991, when on April 13th, an unidentified male abducted 13-year-old Carmine Chan of Templestowe, a classmate of an earlier victim, Nicola Linus. Carmine had been taken at knife point, but unlike the other 3 confirmed victims, she wasn't found until a year later, when her body was discovered with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. To this day, authorities have neither confirmed nor denied a connection between Mr. Cruel and Carmine's unsolved murder, but until it's solved, the similarities have to be taken into account. Carmine was of the same age as the other girls, lived in the same area as the other girls, and was taken at knife point and killed by a handgun, the two weapons preferred by Mr. Cruel during his reign of terror. The only major difference was that Carmine was of Asian descent, doubling as the sign that Bung could be a victim of Mr. Cruel too. While it took place 20 years after the peak of Mr. Cruel's crimes, Bung disappeared in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne without a trace, hinting that her kidnapper had planned her abduction, so it would appear to have happened in an instant, with zero witnesses. If Carmine was indeed killed by Mr. Cruel, it could have been the beginning of his targeting of young Asian schoolgirls, following the pattern of many serial criminals who evolve from rapists to murderers, again mirroring the Golden State Killer. However, the biggest case point to argue against any involvement of Mr. Cruel is the general timing of everything. Mr. Cruel always operated under the cloak of darkness and starlight, spacing his attacks a year or two apart to gain as much intel on his victims as he could before striking. Also, most killers do not take multiple decades off between sprees, and there was absolutely no sign of Mr. Cruel's presence in the Melbourne area between the turn of the millennium through to 2011. Bung was also taken in broad daylight during rush hour along semi-busy roads in neighbourhoods in which many of its residents were alert and awake. Unless Mr. Cruel spent those 20 years underground, simply building the confidence to attack during the day and without his balaclava, it just wouldn't make sense for the cases to be connected. Carmine and Bung's lives were separated by too many years for a connection to be drawn, and thus Mr. Cruel is probably not the perpetrator we're looking for. Despite this, we must ask ourselves, could there be other infamous Melbourne characters living in the area responsible for taking Bung from the streets and hiding her away all these years? It is very possible. One such person of interest was a still unnamed 24-year-old male Australian citizen who called police in August of 2012 to report having inside knowledge relating to the fate of Bung Siribun. The man admitted to accidentally hitting Bung with his car the morning of July 2nd, 2011, and disposing of her body by burying her at a local reserve instead of alerting the authorities due to fear of persecution. However, there simply wasn't enough information to keep him in confinement, and he was released after his confession. Then, 2 months later, in October of 2012, the 24-year-old was detained and interrogated once again, but for whatever reason was released a second time without enough proof to keep him imprisoned. By the end of the year, law enforcement announced the man was no longer considered a major suspect after securing no other information to support his claim. The man could not provide any hard proof that he had hit Bung, and when he led the cops to the reserve where her body was supposedly buried, the detectives found absolutely no forensic or even circumstantial evidence to support his claim. They even compounded the man's vehicle that was said to have been involved, but once more found nothing. The person of interest tag was still applied, but according to the task force, his confession was doubted and the team moved on to pursue other leads. In all honesty, that's probably the smartest move. For a man to hit and kill a young girl on her walk to school, it would have had to happen on a busy road where the man could have been going speeds high enough to inflict death. The only road Bung travelled that could theoretically cause this was busy enough that not even the most skilled criminal could have snuck the body away without anyone seeing or leaving behind any physical clues, and then burying the body miles away in a public reserve. This man was more than likely mentally ill, looking for the spotlight in some ill sense, and made a false confession to gain attention. He may still be a person of interest in the eyes of the police, but we fully believe his testimony to be a real-world red herring. Too many high-profile cold cases see their fair share of people coming forward with manufactured information to gain 15 minutes of fame, and this is, regrettably, one of those instances. Another person of interest was first detailed by the folks over at Unresolved on their own profiling of Bung's disappearance. They posited the theory that noted serial rapist and murderer Gregory Keith Davies could somehow be involved. Davies' criminal background began all the way back in 1968, with convictions of fraud and larceny, then exploded into attempted murder with intent to cause grievous bodily harm in 1971 against a 14-year-old girl. Davies was acquitted on the basis of insanity claims by the defense and held under detainment by the governor until November of 1982. His release then led to the rape and murder of Kylie Marbury, a 6-year-old girl, 2 years later in 1984. However, because Davies could provide an alibi, police never collected his DNA after interviewing him, and he walked free for over 30 years, until in 2016, authorities finally recovered a DNA sample and matched it with DNA found at Mayberry's crime scene. Davies pleaded guilty to imprisonment, rape, and murder charges a year later, and he now sits in prison without the chance of parole until 2045. Davies is an interesting suspect because of the wide range of open timeline in which he could have committed other child murders. Various brave women have come forward in the few years since his arrest, claiming to have survived multiple assaults at the hands of Davies. Police are on their side too, understanding Davies to probably be the perpetrator of numerous other crimes, including those left unsolved. While Davies hasn't confessed to anything related to Bung, his unknown activity during the time she vanished, as well as his age range in selecting victims, could point to him being a credible suspect. There's also another unsettling connection between Davies and Bung's case. If you'll remember the 2 sightings of Bung we previously examined, you'll remember how both of those sightings involved a white vehicle and a male driver. Well, it just so happens in the 30 years between detainments, Davies has been confirmed to have owned and operated an older modelled white Holden HQ station wagon. Now, Davies does not match the description of the driver in the Holden station wagon from the second Bunny sighting, but he does match the driver in the first sighting who drove a like-modelled white sedan. Davies does not have a colourful tattoo. However, it is not outside the realms of possibility that the details of these 2 sightings were inaccurate, and that the white car that was driven by a man in his 60s was a Holden HQ. Davies would have been 62 in 2011, and could have been wearing something around his neck that could appear as a tattoo from a brief glimpse of someone who saw him driving by. While it is undeniably enticing to believe Davies was the man in the sightings and Bung was the girl in the back seat of the white car, it is also a textbook example of coincidental circumstance. Keep in mind that Davies was active in the northern Melbourne suburbs, about 30 kilometres northwest of the Boronia neighbourhoods. Yes, it certainly is possible that he could have been active in surrounding communities, but it also would have required unbelievable amounts of stealth and learning of the Boronia streets and traffic patterns. Again, the potential does exist, but it would require us to accept that Davies avoided leaving a single trace of evidence as a 62-year-old man when he was unable to do so in previous murders as a younger, more able-bodied person. Of course, this is all speculation, but until he is proven otherwise, Davies must still be considered as a strong person of interest. And, because he is still alive, the chance of a confession exists if he is indeed guilty. Before we divulge our hypothesis of Bung Siraboon's unsolved disappearance, we want to make known that our conclusions presented in Cold Case Detective are purely logical speculation based on evidence, circumstance, and factual subtext. We are only privy to the same information presented in each episode, and we do not attempt to promise certainty or an expert guarantee on the findings we reach in closing. We simply observe, research, and report. In the case of Bung Siraboon, we agree with investigators that Bung was kidnapped from the streets of her route to school by a skilled and highly intelligent criminal with a sick perversion for her specifically. How did this person find and single out Bung? It is hard to say. It was well known by police and Bung's friends and family that she was active on social media and the internet at large, owning more than one Facebook account and always online in her spare time on the computer. While experts who dissected her social media accounts and browser history say there was nothing suspicious to suggest she met someone online, it's also possible someone found one of her profiles and started stalking her digitally. If not, whoever it was, the kidnapper could also have lived in one of the neighborhoods traversed by Bung on her way to school. The offender most likely followed her discreetly each day, either on foot or by car, absorbing the atmospheric conditions and making detailed notes of the schedules of those around them. They probably canvassed the streets like this for weeks, maybe even months, making sure that they had her patterns down to a T, and was 100% confident they could strike when no one was looking. Then they waited for the perfect opportunity, when the weather was bad, to keep less wandering neighbors inside and less traffic on the roads. In addition, the perpetrator had to have known Bung walked with friends, and thus needed a morning when she walked alone in order to avoid any witnesses. When June 2nd came and the rains fell and Bung isolated herself on her final journey to Beronia Heights College, tragedy struck like a bolt of lightning, with the monster themselves implementing infinite hours of planning to commit the unthinkable crime. So who could this evil kidnapper be? We believe that rather than a serial offender, this specific perpetrator was only targeting Bung specifically. And while they may have been a petty criminal previously, they weren't snatching children off the street left and right. Could this kidnapper have been the same man who attempted to take that 16-year-old girl on June 21st? It cannot be ruled out. However, this person was probably only interested in Bung, explaining why there was no string of similar disappearances in Beronia or Melbourne at large around that time frame. It could have been a teacher at school, a close but not too close family friend, a neighbor with their blinds closed and one eye looking out. It could have been, and probably is, someone who the police overlooked, who doesn't have an obvious record that screams child abductor. And that may be the most frightening of all, that Bung was taken at the hands of someone still among us, who appears to be someone just like you or I, never suspected to be holding a dark, deadly secret. Whoever it is, they most likely left Melbourne to avoid local police and making a mistake, now watching from a distance, telling themselves they've won, when they most certainly have not. Together, with combined courage and persistence, we can put a spotlight on whoever that person is, and find Bung Siraboon, hopefully alive, to bring her home to a family and community whose only wish is for justice. In the meantime, let's remember the beauty of Bung's loving and soulful life. Let's lift up her achievements as an excelling student, an insightful artist, and a compassionate friend. Bung was full of so many passions and acted upon so many interests. She loved the beach and swimming in the water behind her grandparents' oceanic home, the sunlight beaming from her eyes and glistening over the ocean like the paradise she viewed the world as. She devoted so much time to creating and drawing, expressing her imagination and personality through colourful endeavours on both paper and through dance. And when she wasn't exploring her own soul or seeking out knowledge, Bung was lending a helping hand, gardening on the weekends and sharing ice cream sundaes with her friends. Maybe Bung's most defining trait was her effortless happiness, her ability to forge bonds with anyone and everyone, lifting up those who needed a boost without a moment of second thought. Bung Siraboon was on track to change more than the lives of those immediately around her, and most certainly would have made a wonderful impact on Australia and the greater world beyond. Thus, we must never give up trying to find her, and get her back on that track to making a hopeful, heartfelt difference. This is Cold Case Detective. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cold Case Detective podcast. Should you wish to delve deeper into the mystery, you can follow the case file link included in the show notes, which contains important photographs, documents, maps, and further reading relevant to the case. If you would like to support the show, you can do so by leaving a 5-star rating wherever you listen. It really helps us expand our reach and bring awareness to the cases we cover. If you would like us to investigate a specific case, perhaps even one close to home or that of a loved one, please fill out the submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in a fortnight with a new episode.